Good morning, everyone. Thank y'all all for coming out. I'm Taylor Ernst. I'm curator here at LHUCA, and we have Blake Sanders here with us today, all the way from Missouri, and we appreciate them driving in today. Blake, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for so much for having me. So we are currently based in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is just a couple hours south of St. Louis, right on the Mississippi River. My wife, Hannah, and I teach at Southeast Missouri State University. She's the tenured professor of printmaking. I teach adjunct when they have classes for me, and I'm Mr. Mom most of the time. If you've been in Lubbock for a while, you may have seen our show. We had a show in the big space in 2019, collaborative crochet work that Hannah and I do together. But this is all me, largely growing out of those collaborations in a lot of ways. I'm a printmaker by trade, but my work has been about ecological issues for as long as I can remember. I find that working in fibers with repurposed fabric is a way to sort of live my sort of ecological ideals. I'm using material that would otherwise wind up in the landfill. So everything that you see here was either material that we lived with or wore, or stuff that was donated from family members and colleagues, or was thrifted. Especially in that collaborative work, I talk a lot about how those materials that are coming from other people's lives make those people are sort of silent collaborators, and we are, in the crochet work especially, literally linking our lives together. Yeah.
Awesome. So we talked about a little bit about how this project Roundabouts got started. Can you tell us about the flags?
Yeah, so this body of work really started in 2019. Hannah and I were invited to do a show as part of Lawrence Print Week in Kansas. And we had the option of making it a solo exhibition, but we chose instead to run a community-based protest flag workshop at a space affiliated with our campus. And for most of the people that came for that, they could make a protest flag. For most of the people that came, they'd never made a print before. Most of them had never sewn before, and they got to be part of this national exhibition, so it was definitely their first art show. And out of that work came a couple pieces that I made called Keep Up and Keep Out, which I see as sort of the central dichotomy of America today. You know, we're expected to keep up with the Joneses. It's all about consuming and getting bigger and better and more. But at the same time, you know, as you're growing, you can't get too close to your neighbors. Stay away. That idea of keep up and keep out got me thinking about neighbors. I'm from northern Iowa, and while I guess I'm 3 generations removed from the farm, I still feel very connected to that idea of, you know, if a neighbor needs something, they shouldn't have to ask. You're there to help out, right? And that's not just altruism, that's expecting reciprocity too, that if you need something, they're going to be there for you too. And that's what I want from a neighborhood. That's what I expect from a neighborhood. This work started out of that. We bought our house in 2019, fall of 2019, so just before the pandemic. We got in just under the wire before, you know, at this point we couldn't have afforded a home. And when I was a kid, you know, my parents bought my house in 1983 for $30,000. So home ownership was expected. You know, but by the time we bought our house, it was starting to get out of reach. And now for my students, it seems impossible, you know? So I've been thinking about how I'm living with privilege, right? You know, our house isn't much. It's a 1,300 square foot cottage that's right there and right there and right there. It's all over in the work. But it works for us. It's bigger than the house that I grew up in. It works, and it holds all this work when it's not being shown around the country. So I've been thinking about, you know, the folks that are still aspiring to that, to the American dream, such as it is these days. So, you know, we'll talk about the piece in the middle, and behind us, there's representations of other sorts of homes. That for some folks seem as just a stepping stone along the path to that American dream. But to my mind is just as valid. There's more than one way to live. There's more than one way to skin a cat. We should think of everyone as a neighbor, just not the folks living on your street.
So that brings us to another point that we talked about last night with the roundabout. In Lubbock, we don't have very many roundabouts. We do in some of our newer neighborhoods, but when Lubbock was traditionally formed, it was, kind of a grid pattern. And so they're starting to incorporate a little bit more. And you and I kind of got on that subject of the roundabout as kind of like a shopping cart in a parking lot at the store. It's really easy to slow down in a roundabout to let someone in, or you can be a jerk and just speed through. And it's the same kind of principle of it's really easy to return your shopping cart and not just leave it in the empty parking space and someone hits it next to it. And so let's talk a little bit about that and like that neighborly aspect of the roundabout.
I mean, we can just talk about the shopping cart thing for a while.
Yeah.
I usually spend 5 minutes in a parking lot when I show up at the grocery store just putting away other people's carts because it drives me nuts. Yeah, so the roundabout, the town that I grew up in didn't have them either because we were pretty much built on a grid in the beginning too. But now some of the major drags, in order to cut down on traffic lights, have switched to roundabouts, and it was a major adjustment. When they first come into an area, people don't know what to do about them. Roundabouts are all about trust, right? And again, that idea of reciprocity. You've got to trust that the person that is to your right isn't going to come into you, right? So it takes some getting used to. So when you first approach them, you're either going to, say, screw it, I'm gonna go ahead and take my turn, or you're going to be really nervous and hold up everybody behind you, right? And both of those wind up causing snarls. So I like them as a metaphor because, there's all these different branches, all these different paths to get to your destination. And if we can get along and trust the people that are there with us, we can get to where we need to be quickly and efficiently. But if you think that you're special, or if you think that your time is more precious than everybody else's, it's going to cause problems. The idea of roundabout grew out of one of those flags that says life is a roundabout, not a cul-de-sac. Because I want to make sure I believe in freedom as the big ideal, not the sort of political ideal, that we should have lots of paths that are open to us, not just one way out, right?
So it was really interesting watching you sit with members of the community during First Friday. And so you're welcome to take off your shoes and sit or lean your head back on a pillow and kind of just observe that. And so I think all of the pillows are filled with plastic sacks, right?
Yeah.
Plastic bags, yeah.
Yep.
Levy told me that when they first got here, he was helping him bring it in. He was like, these are filled with plastic bags. I was like, that's really cool. And so tell us a little bit about the process of how you create the homes and the different images that we see through printmaking, drawing, and sewing.
Yeah, so pretty much all of the sort of line work that you see throughout these works began as pencil drawings that were then rendered digitally to sort of beef up the contrast so that I could expose them, turn them into screen prints. And screen prints are what you have on your t-shirts, right? All of those images are printed on various colors, patterns, textures of fabric, so I can get more bang for my buck. Because I am at home with the kids most of the time, most of these projects, I only get one day in the studio to do all of my printing, and then I come home and cut those things up and essentially collage them together on the sewing machine. And that's in contrast to the way I would normally work as a traditional printmaker, where I'm printing on paper, and every one of those colors or patterns would be a separate screen that I would have to hand print before I laid down that key image of the line work. So there is a matter of efficiency with that work. There's also a matter of thrift. Because this is repurposed fabric, a lot of it, like I said, is coming from our lives. So we've already gotten our use out of it, and finding another use, or we're thrifting it. So I can, this is probably 2 maybe $300 worth of fabric, as opposed to I probably would have spent a couple $1,000s on paper for an exhibition this size. So that works for me. Like you said, the pillows are filled with salvaged grocery sacks. And the pillows are part of this series called Anywhere I Lay My Head. And they started with our house plus the bigger, like the McMansions that you see behind me and on some of them. So filling them with those plastic sacks was sort of a reminder of our day-to-day consumption, the things that we don't think about, but we're compiling and we're consuming all the time. If you do choose to go lay down with them, they're comfortable to a point, but you've also got that irritating kind of crackling sound. And that's to remind you of that, the downsides of our everyday conveniences.
Let's talk about, forget what this piece is called. Together, Will We Like It or Not? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the one again?
Yeah, let's talk about that one because you're talking about how you're incorporating the boys into that one and like.
Yeah, so the kids have been a major part of the work from the beginning. Hannah and I were, I don't know, anxious isn't quite the right word, but we thought a lot about having kids and bringing another consumer into an already overcrowded world, right? The kids are in the work as a sort of illustration of our sort of domestic bliss, but also a metaphor for our impulsiveness as humans, the things that we do that, the everyday things that we do that wind up having an impact on the collective and on the planet as a whole. So you see pieces like Wrestling with Our Better Angels, the big piece in the center there, that's Levy as a big woodcut, literally ripping up the landscape, playing tug of war with himself. And in those layers, that sort of strata of earth, you see printed layers of landfill imagery and things. Because, from the beginning, I remember being probably 8 years old, riding my bike in my hometown and seeing the trash on the side of the road and thinking, that's our fossil record, that's our lasting impact. Because at the time I was going to be a paleontologist, right? But then I figured out I could draw, and here we are.
At the end of your artist statement, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday as well, there was kind of one message that you wanted people to try to take away from this exhibition, and what was that?
Gosh, I don't remember what I say.
So you kind of talked about, leaving the world better than we found it, and also being a better person than someone may be to you, and like that reciprocity type thing.
Yeah, so where to start with that? I'm a second generation Eagle Scout, right? So, and as long as my grandmother draws breath, my kids will be Eagle Scouts too. So there's an expectation that you leave a space better than you found it. When you are camping, especially when you're doing what's called high adventure, where you're sort of off the grid doing weeks-long hikes and things, you leave wherever you were bedded down for the night better than you found it. And in places like Philmont, that's in New Mexico, that makes sense because there's probably thousands of scouts who come through that space over the course of a summer. And I try and live with like that anywhere. So when I'm doing a visiting artist gig at somebody else's university, I'm going to spend extra time before I get started for the day cleaning up that shop so I leave it better than I found it. The other thing about that, we're taught to live by the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. And I feel like that's not enough for me, because I don't treat myself that well. So I really want to treat people better than I treat myself, and whenever possible, I'm thinking about others before I'm thinking about myself. And I don't think that's necessarily something that I try and model it, but I don't try and require it of my audience, because I'm living with an enormous amount of privilege as a white guy in America. Not everybody's starting with that big head start. So it's something I can do to sort of mitigate that privilege and feel like a better global citizen for the folks that didn't start with that head start.
Cool. Do you have any questions for Blake?
I'm curious about your decision to use printmaking, other than it being kind of your background and for the aesthetic. Is there a conceptual reason for you to?
I mean, the easy answer is yes. The real answer is I make it a print because that's the way I think. Like everything I make, whether it has actual printmaking components in it, at this point to me is a print because of the sort of slow, methodical, sort of meditative ways in which I work. That feels like a print to me. I'm tending to think about, even if they are one-of-a-kind things, I like to have the option to mass produce. So that's certainly part of it, especially since I'm not able to be in the studio as much as I'd like. I have this sort of library of raw material that I can sort of riff off of to make future works. And also, printmaking is the democratic medium. I talk about it as the original social medium, the original social media. So I think there's a philosophical reason I use it too. I'm referencing the multiple and without printmaking, the planet would still be illiterate, except for the grand high muckety mucks that could afford hand copied books, So I think I still use printmaking as a reference to that egalitarianism that I try and model elsewhere in the work.
Can you talk a little bit more about the houses depicted in your installations? You said something about your own house and mansions around your neighborhood.
Yeah. So the little guy at the top of this one behind me, that's our house. And that's a 1926 cottage. I think it was probably a Sears and Roebuck kit house, but I'm not certain on that. The bigger ones in the other, east, south, and west, those are homes from my aunt and uncle's neighborhood in Windsor, Colorado. And their house, which is the yellow one there, is probably the smallest one on their street. And they're big honking homes. And, it's handy for family get-togethers because they've got a big enough house that they can house a lot of us. But that neighborhood, it's really nice, but it kind of creeps me out because nobody's ever outside, nobody's ever interacting with their neighbors, because they've got these big mondo houses that they can kind of treat as their castles, right? And I worry a lot about isolation in our society, and I feel like in some ways those houses are a good metaphor for our isolation as a country. You've got this big space, so you don't even have to see your own family. You can kind of go off to your own bedroom in your own wing of the house, and you don't even have to see them anymore, right? And that worries me. So I don't know. Do I sound too much like a class warrior? Because I might be. So that was the beginning. The other ones, the trailer, the RV, the apartment complex, and the sort of abandoned house, the squatter house, those are all in Cape Girardeau. So the trailer is near the preschool and the taekwondo that the kids go to. The RV's on our walk to the farmer's market. The apartment complex is across the street from the post office. And the house is on the walk to River Campus, where all the art buildings are. So these are places that I'm experiencing in town. And they're all, the big houses, the McMansions, that's the north side of the town that we live in. Cape Girardeau is a really old town, probably, 240 years old or better. But there's a town that connects to us, Jackson, that for its whole existence, which is probably 150 years, has been a white flight town. So once you can afford it, you go to Jackson, and like the north side of Cape Girardeau are all the bigger homes, and there's some real class distinctions. We live closer to the south side of town where it's more integrated, more modest-sized homes. So these are the experiences of my neighbors. And again, that's a way for me to acknowledge the privilege we have in our home, while also sort of embracing the broader neighborhood of the community that I'm surrounded by.
Thank you so much. It really helped me to figure out the identities of those depicted houses because I had no clue at first,
Sure.
other than design choices and
Yeah.
their shapes.
Yeah.
How large is the population in Girardeau?
Cape Girardeau, 37,000, buddy? Roughly?
5,000.
No.
136.
No. It might be 35,000. I'm pretty sure it's about 37,000 because I think it's real close to the size of my hometown.
Okay.
Nice try.
But
in this work, have you found that your definition of neighbor has expanded? Because as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, oh, I have digital neighbors, I have identity neighbors, I have like a variety of different types of neighbors. So I'm just wondering, do you have like a working definition that you can help me out with?
That's a really good question, bud. Thank you for that. Yeah, so I use neighbor on as big a scale as possible. I think about us as global neighbors, right? I'm not just thinking about the people that I'm in direct contact with. I'm thinking about all of us, because like the flag says over there, we don't have to like each other to look out for each other, and we're all in this together, whether we like it or not, right? So yeah, absolutely. I think about community in all sorts of ways, because in some ways in Cape Girardeau, we're pretty isolated. We're 7.5 hours from our nearest family member, but there's not a whole lot of like-minded people where we are either. So we are looking for community online. We're looking for community in sort of our professional circles, while at the same time trying to, keep a finger locally to make sure that our neighbors who don't necessarily like us can at least learn to live with us, right? Does that sort of answer your question? You look slightly dissatisfied.
I'm satisfied. I'm just thinking like, oh my gosh, I need like to talk to people online who are like me, because no one that's an actual traditional definition of a neighbor like lives around me. Like there's
For sure.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like it's really interesting to think about where we live in Lubbock and where you guys are in Missouri as like super conservative, to be blunt, places.
Well, I think part of what has helped us in Cape Girardeau is we've been pretty deliberate as to where we're living. We didn't want to try and cloister ourselves in the nicer part of town. We wanted to live in a place that was affordable for us, but also felt more neighborly. Like Hannah and I met in New Orleans after Katrina. We lived in Section 8 housing in Baton Rouge when we first moved there for grad school for her. And we have always found that our most supportive, our best neighbors have been when we've lived in the worst neighborhoods, right? And that was sort of a priority when we bought our house too. We stayed in a part of town that, again, economics played a certain role, but we were pleased that we stayed in the part of town where we were, because the kids are going to schools that are racially, socially, economically integrated. So they are living around folks a lot of them are living pretty different lives than we're living, and I think that's really good for them. And it's very different than the way I grew up which was a really homogenous town. So that was a priority for us. And we've gotten really lucky with the neighbors we've had as a result. And when we moved into our neighborhood, it used to be the old cliche if you move into the neighborhood and somebody drops off cookies for you or something, And I sort of did the reverse. I was touching base with neighbors when we moved in to start to build a relationship. And again, we don't have to be up in each other's business. I don't really want to know that much about you, but I want you to know that I'm looking out for you in a casual way. We have to get on the road immediately after this and drive 14 hours home, and there's a major winter storm blowing through. So we could have, a foot or more of snow when we, by this time Monday morning. That's what we get in 4 years, usually, in Cape. So I'm the only person on the street that has a shovel. So when we do get snow, I'm shoveling my neighbor's walks. And, we live on this hill and people are trying to get to work or get to the grocery store, and I'm out there helping them push their cars up the hill. And sometimes they don't know what to do. Like, what are you doing? It's like, well, what do you mean? What am I doing? This is what we're supposed to do. Like, if you didn't want, I don't know. We agreed to be part of a society, and I can do this, so I want to do this. And if we all do this a little bit, it makes all of our lives a hell of a lot easier.
I'm satisfied. I don't know what my face is done, but I'm happy.
Yeah, cool.
I think we have time for a few more questions.
Did you have a question?
So I, as a two-artist household with two children, I relate completely. Also, as the adjunct wife, for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And so I spent a lot of time trying to relearn how to make studio practice when the kids were little. And I had a really, really good baby monitor. So I could, I know that I spent a lot of time before kids, I think, farting around more. I'm not sure what the hell I did with all of my free time, because as soon as I had that nap time of Maddie, bless her, made the best 2-hour naps ever. So I knew exactly what I could get done in 2 hours.
Yeah.
So I think that as artists, we don't talk a lot about parenting and making art and little children and how you manage all of that. So if you could please tell us your secrets on that.
Well, yeah. This is a really big question, and we think about this stuff a lot. So Hannah and I are actually, shortly after we get home, we've got to ship a piece to Lincoln, Nebraska for a show about caretakers in printmaking. And we've made it a priority to apply for the very small handful of residencies that are family friendly. We try and put our identity as a family pretty forward in our work. Switching to working with a lot of fibers helped a lot. It's a heck of a lot easier to work with fabric around kids than it was working with paper. When they were really little, if they puke on a rug that we're crocheting, we can throw it in the wash. They've gotten really good. Levy, when he was really little, we'd be sewing and he would be untangling bits of string that was on the floor, and they've gotten really good at finding pins for us. The way that we work with kids is very different. Hannah is a perpetual maker, so she doesn't, if she were up here, she would tell you that she doesn't feel like she's finishing a lot of work right now, but she's the most prolific sketchbook artist I've ever seen. And she makes all of her sketchbooks from old prints and things. So she's making, 4, 5, 6, Dallas size phone books of these sketchbooks a year. And I think that's a big part of her practice, is she's at least able to draw and to think, even if she's not making work that is traditionally gallery worthy. But we're about to put up a show at Coastal Carolina University for their book arts festival. and it's going to be all her sketchbooks. So Hannah's a perpetual maker and is a compulsive maker. I'm compelled to make. I was telling Taylor as we were setting this up, if I didn't get to have interactions like this with an audience, I don't know that I'd be making things.
Which I think that's really interesting, that concept of the need for you to, that need of the audience interaction. And it kind of goes back to that like neighborly aspect of like being able to have those conversations about your work
Yeah.
and facing your audience and, you know, interacting and asking those questions and, you know, sitting in the roundabout. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of it. It's also completely selfish. I don't get to have very many adult conversations, right? So getting to have something like this means a lot to me. So, you know, like I said, I am sort of compelled to make. When I have an idea, when I have a show coming up, then I make. So, you know, a lot of the, you know, this piece, the orange one over there, they were finished within the last 2 weeks. I was finishing the crochet on this on New Year's Day. So when I have a deadline, and it's probably because I was raised by a graphic designer, deadlines are my entire life, I am sort of cramming, right? So that means that it winds up making Hannah's life a little harder for a few weeks, but I'm trying my best in those spaces between shows to give her time and give her space to be making in the way that makes her happy. So, but yeah, it's hard, and there's often not a whole lot of sympathy or empathy from the institution about having a family and doing the academic thing. So,
Larkin, you had a question?
Kind of back to the disconnect. Since you're probably a little bit older than me, when do you think that disconnect between neighbors happened?
that's a really good question. So I am the eldest millennial. Okay, so I was born in '81. I graduated from high school in 2000. The internet was a new thing when I was in junior high. And the way that the internet was advertised to us, it was this egalitarian, utopian, beautiful thing. Like, we're all gonna come together, we're all gonna share this information, and it's gonna bring us closer together as a community, and then social media happened. Facebook happened when I was probably my last year of undergrad, maybe the first year of must have been, yeah. So I didn't know what it was. I got on MySpace for a hot minute towards the end of grad school as MySpace was dying. And I don't have a Facebook account. Like, I kind of cruise on Hannah's some, and we share Instagram. And Instagram has been useful to us. It's gotten us shows. It's grown our art community, which is our sort of chosen family. Like, we literally got married at an international printmaking conference. That's another story. But I don't spend much time on social media because I can feel it as a time suck, and I've watched it get more toxic, right? So I think that was a lot of it. I think, you know, the pandemic certainly didn't help. I think having so much media that we're sort of expected to consume. Back in my day, people that were into movies and into comic books and they were dorks, right? Yeah, they were considered sort of social outcasts, and now the nerds run everything. And so you're expected to consume so much more so you can be conversant in Marvel lore, and you can be conversant in, you know, what's the hot thing on Netflix right now. And as a result, we're consuming all this media, and we're not really having many interactions. Like, if I'm not getting 4 hours of streaming a night, I'm not gonna be able to have the couple conversations I might have with my colleagues the next day. Like, hey, are you watching this? But as a result, we're not out that much. You know, my grandfathers were Elks and Eagles. They were part of these fraternal organizations. My dad was in a softball league and a dart league. I couldn't even imagine doing that stuff now. And as a result, like, the interactions I'm having are with the folks at work, and that's about it. You know, it's just so easy to be isolated. Plus, everybody's scared of each other. You know, and we've been made to be afraid of each other. It's, you know, 24-hour news probably has a lot to do with that too. You got to keep the outrage machine moving. You got to keep the fear machine moving so that we keep watching, right? I fear nothing and no man, and it's probably because I don't consume that stuff generally. Like, I have my online diet is a few old school, you know, I read the Washington Post, and then I read Slate and Vox, and then I don't go down rabbit holes. Like, I don't really know what Reddit is. I mean, I do, but I don't. Like, I don't get involved, right? Because those are the communities, like, you can find people that are like-minded, but sometimes, you know, there's some bad apples in there too that can pull you down bad paths. So I don't know. That just made me sound super old. Like, I'm not a total Luddite. But I miss when online was gonna be this panacea for culture, and now I feel like it's really hurting us in a lot of ways.
A big letdown, and I'm probably interpreting this completely wrong, but what you're kind of saying is, like, the nerds felt like outcasts, so they made something to make outcasts of each other.
Of everybody else, yeah. I mean, if Elon Musk wouldn't have happened, you know, 25 years ago. Like, he is the most socially awkward, strangest person, and now he is, like, worshipped by a pretty good chunk of this country, and it blows my mind. Like, and I don't know how much of, you know, I think he's built this mystique of genius that doesn't seem totally earned to me. He's not a very good engineer, and the money has a lot to do with it.
Yep.
You know, you know,
Money can warp your sense of reality if you let it.
for sure. And there's that old line from Simpsons. I think it was about Duff beer. Like, beer is the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. That was really talking about money. Like, too much money seems to cause madness, you know. So
I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know they have to get on the road. So I'm going to ask my final question that is my favorite question since last year. When you do have your one day in the studio, what do you like to listen to?
so as a printmaker, we weren't really allowed to listen to music, like, starting off in my foundations program. So I didn't listen to a ton of music. So I had all these conversations going on around me in the shop. So as a result, I don't tend to listen to music when I'm being creative. I listen to podcasts and I listen to audiobooks. I'm on that Libby app that connects to your local library. I read 91 books this past year.
Wow.
Because once you start listening, you can listen faster. So sometimes I'm consuming books at triple speed. So yeah,
Libby's a great app.
I'm listening to a lot of stuff. I was telling Bud the other night, like, I'm on a 7.5-year streak. I actually just broke it because I'm listening to 1491 right now. But I was on a 7.5-year streak of not reading anything that was by straight white men. So I'm really expanding my horizons of what's out there, because that's basically all I read for the first 30 plus years of my life. And I'm sick of listening to people that look and sound like me. Yeah, there's so many more perspectives out there. So yeah, I'm listening to books, I'm listening to podcasts. When I do listen to music, I really like it. And that's part of the problem, is it's too distracting for me when I'm trying to be productive. So
Cool.
yeah.
Well, like, Hannah, thank y'all so much for driving all the way out here and spending the week with us. And it was fun getting to know y'all. And we really appreciate y'all coming all this way out.
Well, thanks again for having me. Thanks y'all for coming out.